I'll just tell all the committee members now, I had intended to work SB 5, but I'm not going to do that today. So we'll wait until, and we don't have a meeting on Tuesday, so on Thursday, expect to work that bill. And we'll see how this hearing goes and decide what we want to do with that. But we'll definitely be working SB 5 on Thursday rather than today. So, all right, with that, I'm going to move to our first order of business, which is a hearing on Senate Bill 6. And I'd ask the revisers to tell us what this thing's all about.
Mike Heim with the Reviser Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, the explanation is probably longer than the bill. It says no form of ranked choice voting method shall be used in determining the election or nomination of any candidate to any federal, state, county, or other municipal elected office. There's a definition of ranked choice voting, and there's what I would consider kind of a boilerplate. I'm not aware of any city, which would be the only entity that might even try it. I'm not aware of anybody that's actually done it, but in case there is a subsection C voids any ordinance or resolution that would provide that. So. And I left a file downstairs, so I'm going to run downstairs and get it. But if you have questions, I'll try and answer them.
Are there any questions for the reviser on Senate Bill 6? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Just to make clear, the bill, it affects general elections, primary elections, city, everything?
Correct. There's no exception.
Okay, any other questions for the reviser? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. All right, I'm going to move to proponent testimony. And the first, before I say that, committee, we have one person who's listed as an opponent who's actually a proponent. He has written only testimony. Mr. John Merrill from Secure Elections Project. Is a proponent of Senate Bill 6, but he's listed as an opponent. And so with that, I'm going to call our first WebEx conferee, which is Mr. Jason Sneed. Welcome back to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Proctor. Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And it's good to be with you all again. My name is Jason Sneed. I'm Executive Director of Honest Elections Project Action. We're a national group dedicated to preserving the integrity of our election system. I'm here today to speak in support of Senate Bill 6, which is a common sense measure to ban the incredibly complicated scheme known as ranked choice voting. And as you just heard a moment ago, this is very much a situation where explaining ranked choice voting takes a lot longer than it does to actually read the bill. Ranked choice voting, simply put, is a system that undermines the traditional one person, one vote way of running an election. Rather than vote for a single candidate in any particular race, it asks voters to rank candidates by order of preference. Candidates are then eliminated based on who got the fewest first place vote, and votes are redistributed based on each voter's next highest selection. That process continues until someone receives a purported majority of the vote. For reasons that we'll get into throughout the testimony here in a moment, that is not always a true majority, and there are lots of deficiencies in this system. Ranked choice voting promises that it will ensure that only majoritarian candidates win elections, but all it can really do is manufacture a majority. This incredibly complex scheme has been rejected in states across the country. To date, 11 states have banned ranked choice voting, including Missouri, which in 2024 adopted a constitutional prohibition with the support of nearly 70% of the electorate. At the same time, 6 other states had ranked choice voting ballot measures all rejected. And that is not just red states that rejected ranked choice voting last year. We're talking about states as politically disparate as Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, Montana, and Oregon. All of those measures were overwhelmingly rejected by bipartisan majorities. In other words, the public consensus is clear: ranked choice voting has no place in American elections. RCV makes every stage of the voting process more complicated, so much so that enormous effort must be put into re-educating the public on how to vote. New York City spent $15 million teaching people how to cast a ballot in their first RCV election, and Maine was forced to produce a 19-page guide for voters. Voting with an RCV system takes more time than voters are accustomed to. First, voters have to study the platforms of numerous candidates for each office, including many who are fringe or otherwise unelectable. Then they must decide which candidates to rank and the order in which to rank them for every race on the ballot. One MIT study found that filling out a ballot takes 12 seconds longer per candidate compared to a typical plurality style election. In a final five style system, which is the most common variant of ranked choice voting we have seen pushed nationwide, that would add a full minute per race to the time it takes to vote. In other words, if RCV advocates succeed in replacing federal, state, and local elections with RCV, the time it takes to vote could easily double, risking long lines, voter fatigue, and down ballot races, and potentially deterring people from voting altogether. Because of the complexity of RCV, it is possible that tabulation mistakes can go undetected. In fact, Oakland, California experienced this firsthand in just 2022. Tabulators mistakenly eliminated hundreds of votes and certified the wrong winner in a school board contest. And that error nearly went undetected because of RCV's inherent complexity. With RCV, there are numerous issues. I won't belabor all of them, but I will briefly touch on a few. A 2023 study by the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota concluded that ranked choice voting failed to reduce political polarization, increase diversity among elected officials, increase voter turnout, or decrease negative campaigning, all of which are promises that RCV makes. In fact, one study of RCV in Maine found that, quote, negative spending increased significantly, casting doubt on the claim that RCV makes campaigns more civil. There are numerous jurisdictions that have tried ranked choice voting only to repeal it. For instance, proponents of ranked choice voting often tout a Utah pilot project as a successful instance of RCV. And yet, of the 24 cities that were recruited to participate, half withdrew before the program it was due to sunset. The push for ranked choice voting is not an organic bottom-up movement led by local activists. It is a concerted national campaign by a small group of elite mega donors that are financing campaigns to remake elections and experiment with your elections across the country. They are financing local groups, hiring lobbyists, facilitating media coverage, and spending millions of dollars on ballot measures. Americans rejected those measures last year, and I think there is a very clear reason why. They want elections with clear rules that deliver clear winners. RCV offers neither. I encourage you to advance Senate Bill 6 and protect Kansas elections from the confusing scheme known as ranked choice voting. Thank you for considering this testimony, and I'm happy to stand for questions if there are any.
Committee, are there any questions for Mr. Snead? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you may have actually mentioned this, and I may have missed it. How many states are actually still actively using ranked choice voting?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are only 2 states that currently use ranked choice voting, Maine and Alaska. There was an attempt, as I said, to bring ranked choice voting to additional states last year in the form of ballot measures. All of those were defeated. There was an attempt to repeal the measure in Alaska that was narrowly defeated by just 700 votes. And there's currently a repeal effort going on again in Alaska, but there are just 2 states that have any experience running ranked choice voting elections statewide.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Snead, doesn't New York City use ranked choice voting, or what's the status in New York?
Yes, sir. There are a number of localities that use ranked choice voting, about 50 or so nationwide, cities and counties. New York City uses it in their mayoral primary. They used it for the first time in 2021. That was the race where Eric Adams was first elected. So they use it in the primary, which is the de facto election in the city of New York.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Snead? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony, and I won't take it personal that you were here for the Senate committee, but not for me. So,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, our next conferee on WebEx is Madeline Melissa. Ma'am, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. I'm a visiting fellow with the Opportunity Solutions Project, and Jason did a great job in his testimony covering some of the problems with ranked choice voting, but I wanted to touch on a few additional things. As part of my written testimony, I provided you this. This is a copy of the mayoral Minneapolis ballot. So for those of you who haven't actually seen what a ballot looks like in ranked choice voting, you can take a look at this and imagine what it would look like in your district. This race had 40,000 possible combinations of candidates to choose from. And I live in Portland, Maine. That's where I'm testifying from today. And I want to tell you that ranked choice voting here in Maine, I've been voting in these elections since 2018. It's really been a disaster. It's been a disaster for voters, and it's been a disaster for candidates. And a petition to repeal it has actually just gained enough signatures for the ballot. Just want to give you a few examples of ranked choice voting results and races. So where I live in Portland, we use them in local races. And we had a race back in 2021, one of the races I voted in, where a candidate had 4% of the ballot, 4% of the vote after the first round of tabulation, but ended up winning the election. And in Maine, our second congressional district, our northern district here, we had a candidate who would have won under traditional voting, the Republican candidate. He had 46% of the vote, but because he didn't reach that ranked choice voting 50% threshold, the race went into subsequent rounds of tabulation. There were 8,000 ballots that were eliminated from the race. Those are people who had only voted for one candidate. And the Democrat ended up winning that election. Alaska had very similar results in 2022 in their special election. This was to fill the seat of Congressman Don Young. There were about 15,000 ballots that were discarded in that race. And as has been mentioned in New York City, the Democratic mayoral primary, they use it there as we discussed. In the first time in 2021, Eric Adams' race, 140,000 ballots were discarded in that race. It took 11 rounds of tabulations, and then it was discovered that there had been test ballots inadvertently counted, 135,000 of them. In the end, it took almost a month to declare the winner of that race. And in Alameda County, California, a deep blue district, the ranked choice voting software error took a month, 2 months actually, in which the third place finisher had been discovered that they had actually won the race. So just in summary, if this sounds confusing and if this sounds unfair and you like traditional one person, one vote system in Kansas, which of course works very well, I would urge you to consider supporting this legislation. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Committee, are there any questions for Ms. Melissa? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. And I'm looking at your handout here. And is this legitimately the ballot for the Minneapolis mayoral ballot? Is that what?
Yes, it is. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative. Yes, this is the 2013 Minneapolis mayoral ballot.
So
40,495 possible combinations of candidates.
So how did Captain Jack Sparrow do? I mean, if you look, it's down at the bottom here. It's Captain Jack Sparrow. He's from the Count All Rankings Committee or party.
Well, that's a good question. We'll have to look it up on the website. But yes, these are the types of the ballots. In fact, in Alaska, they had a candidate named Santa Claus on their ballot in the last election. So.
Well, thank you.
I believe that he narrowly edged out Abdul the Rockman. So, yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions for Ms. Melissa? I've got Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm hidden over here. It's certainly not intentional. Yes, thank you. Despite what my ranking said on the floor today about how I'm great at math, I am not. So in the state of Kansas, we only have 5 recognized political parties right now, which to me doesn't seem like we could end up with how many thousands were mentioned of combinations we could have. Is anyone here on the committee willing, or maybe the conferee willing to explain how many combinations we could have with 5 recognized political parties under the ranked choice ballot?
Representative A, I don't do public math, and B, let's try to keep it to the conferee. We can have a discussion if we work it.
No worries. So, well, this really is directed towards the conferee, but just, I don't know how many recognized parties there are in Minnesota.
Um, Through the chair, Representative, I don't know how many recognized parties there are, whether it's open like this. And I also, like you, don't do public math, but I'm certainly happy to bring that information back to the committee.
Yeah, that would be great because it seems to me like they may just have completely open ability to run. And in the state of Kansas, we don't have that opportunity. So I'm just trying to see how this would apply to our situation. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got the Vice Chairman and then Representative Simmons.
Yes, my question is regarding the situation where somebody with 4% of the original vote somehow won. Do you know how that happened? I mean, how they had all the second place votes, or how on earth could that even be possible?
It's a great question. And I had the same feeling after voting in that election, frankly, because the person who had the second most candidates lost that election to someone with 4%. But this is the kind of result that happens in ranked choice voting where it turns losers into winners, frankly. And results like that do not inspire confidence. I can tell you that as a ranked choice voting voter here in the state of Maine.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does ranked choice voting, I mean, where they discard ballots, so if you only vote for one person and you don't vote for second, third, fourth place, is it inherent in ranked choice voting that they would throw your ballot out? Or are there different ways that ranked choice voting tabulates votes in certain situations? I mean, what would you say about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is. This is actually a feature of the process, not a bug. And I will tell you this: there was one race in San Francisco where more ballots were discarded than were counted, and that's the feature of the system. And it happens in every ranked choice voting race because as you do, like in my situation here, when I go in to vote, if I want to vote for only candidates that support law and order or the Second Amendment, in order to have your ballot guaranteed to count, you have to vote for every single candidate on that ballot. So if you decide to only vote for one candidate or two candidates that line up with your own political views, you are at risk of having your ballot thrown out. And that is indeed what happened in that race.
Thank you.
Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking here at this ballot, and it says there are the three columns: first choice, second choice, and third choice. It says second choice, if any. Is that to be interpreted as though someone could, in fact, in Minneapolis, cast a ballot and only vote for one person?
Through the chair, Representative, the answer is if you want to guarantee your ballot count, you have to vote for every candidate. However, you do have the choice not to vote, which is something that I do routinely for candidates that I don't agree with.
I'm kind of confused by your answer. Do you think you could maybe rephrase that? Because it says quite clearly, second choice, if any.
Through the chair, Representative. So I guess here's the bottom line. Yes, you could decide to vote for one person, and you could decide vote for one person in every single first place, second place, and so on, as many places as there are. However, if you want to make sure that your ballot is not discarded, then you would have to vote for every single candidate on the ballot in ranked order.
I'm genuinely not trying to belabor the point. I don't understand why your ballot would be discarded in this election when it clearly says, if any, suggesting you have one option or two options.
Through the chair, Representative. Again, so if you decide to only vote for one candidate and that candidate is then eliminated, your ballot is also eliminated. So if you decide to vote for one candidate and that candidate is then eliminated from the race in subsequent rounds of tabulation, your ballot would also be eliminated.
I don't think that sounds so different from being a Democrat in Kansas. But thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the conferee? Okay, ma'am, thank you very much for your testimony. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
So I have no one else listed to testify as a proponent on Senate Bill 6. Is there anyone else wishing to testify as a proponent? I believe you're an opponent to the ban, correct, sir? Yeah, okay. All right, is there anybody wishing to speak in favor of banning ranked choice voting? I know it's confusing, right? In favor of no. All right, and committee, I again direct your attention to the written proponent testimony, including Mr. John Merrill, who's listed as an opponent on this sheet, on this agenda. I'm going to move on to neutral testimony, and my first in-person conferee is Mr. Clay Barker. Welcome back to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel, the Kansas Secretary of State. Now, I'll start out, some of you have joked with me that the Secretary of State tends to be neutral on a lot of these bills, and that comes from, I think, Secretary Schwab, when he was in the House, had some bad experiences with the executive trying to run the legislature over, so he's very deferential, and he instructs us to be neutral, even though you can kind of tell from our testimony we may lean one way or the other. But getting on with the bill, first of all, Representative Williams, to answer your question, as far as we know, 2 states employ ranked choice voting, about 50 municipalities employ it, either because they have independent ability to run their own elections or their state legislature allows them to, and about 6 states use it in a limited manner for the military and overseas voters if they use a runoff election like Georgia. Because a runoff election has to be so fast after their general, the overseas voters are asked to give their second, third, or fourth choice, and that becomes their first choice in the runoff election. Getting onto the bill, since 1861, that's Civil War time, Kansas has banned ranked choice voting with KSA 25702, and it does that because it mandates plurality voting in Kansas. That means, and that is for all elections for the choice of any officer. And therefore, it's 1 vote per office. Person with the most votes wins. So we don't have any runoff elections or majority voting. Currently, no county in Kansas has the ability to do ranked choice voting. As far as we know, no city has ever tried to do it. And that ban does not affect party-run primaries. So if a party wants to do a presidential preference primary on its own, they can do it any way they want. The Secretary believes, however, that SB 6 is not redundant. First, it ensures there's no novel judicial interpretations of the statute, which can happen. And second, it ensures that no municipalities try to use an expansive application of home rule to run an election with ranked choice voting. Up until 1968, cities and school districts in Kansas ran their own elections. Their clerks ran it for them. After that, the counties took it over, and counties themselves are prohibited from using ranked choice voting in state statute already. They can't exempt themselves from state election law. There's a couple valid reasons for not adopting ranked choice voting. You've heard them. I won't belabor it. 2 last points. One, I was asked by a city in Kansas that uses, when it has a vacancy on a city council, so it's a vacancy, not an election, it creates a board that interviews all the candidates, and then the board, each board member ranks a candidate either first, this is my first choice, 5 points, my second choice, 3 points, my third choice, 1 point. The clerk adds up all the points. The 5 finalists move on to the next stage of the process. That is not ranked choice voting. This bill would not affect that at all. And last, there's a lot of literature on ranked choice voting, but something popped up in the last few days, and it had a good line. It says, changes to our electoral architecture should be undertaken with sober respect for political realities and the risk of unintended consequences. And the authors were saying, if you're going to adopt something like ranked choice voting, it should be done by the legislature with a lot of thought, details worked out, and implications thought through. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for any questions from the committee.
Are there any questions for Mr. Barker? Representative Berquist.
Mr. Chair, I think you mentioned this when you were talking about that is not ranked choice. When a municipality has all city council at large, there's maybe 5 positions or 3 positions at large, then when the list of candidates are nonpartisan, and so they come in maybe 16 candidates, and then the top at-large positions by number of votes they got become either the ones to move forward to the general, or they become the candidate. Is that accurate? And that is the distinction between ranked choice, because you're not ranking them. You're just saying, I want this one, and this one, and that's it.
Correct, Representative. It's 1 vote per office. So if you have 3 slots, you get 3 votes. And that's how a lot of cities or community colleges do their elections. That is not ranked choice voting. This bill would not affect that.
And even though they're on an aggregate list, they still are, you're saying, these are the three I want, and forget the rest.
Correct. It's one vote per office,
Thank you.
or per position.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Barker, the question about political parties and their primaries, that's because the party kind of runs it, and so they would not be bound by whatever, they could do whatever system they wanted? Is that?
Mr. Vice Chair, I want to make sure I'm clear on that. So if the primary is run by the state, there's no ranked choice voting. If a party runs like a presidential preference primary by itself, not run by the state government, it can do any method it wants. This law, the state cannot tell a party how to run its internal affairs.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? So the statute that you cite that says like, okay, counties are not allowed to do this, does it explicitly say ranked choice voting? Does it say a plurality? Is the language?
Right.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, I'm sorry.
There's the general statute, 25702, just says that for every election, for any office, it's one vote per office. It's plurality voting. The second was about limited home rule for counties, and that's cited in my testimony, but it says counties cannot exempt themselves from election laws.
Okay, and did he get it? Okay, I guess you passed. Professor Heim gives you an A. Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, committee.
So committee, I'll direct your attention to the one written neutral conferee. And is there anybody else wishing to testify as neutral on this bill? All right, I'm going to close neutral testimony and open opponent testimony. And our first conferee is Mr. Chris Saxman. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you. Very quick. My name is Chris Saxman. I served 4 terms in the Virginia House of Delegates from 2002 to 2010. Most recently, I ran our Lieutenant Governor's transition, inauguration, and PAC after she won the election in 2021. My testimony today is about the Virginia Republican experience with ranked choice voting, very favorable, successful use of ranked choice voting in limited situations. We believe up front that this bill is unnecessary because your statutes already cover it. But Virginia's, the Virginia Republican example was one in which after the 2020 presidential election, we were in a situation, my job is to interpret politics for the business community and tell them what's coming up. And with the 2020 election, we were looking at a gubernatorial election in 21 and a possible Republican comeback. We hadn't won in 12 years. But I called the executive director of the Republican Governors Association, my former campaign manager, who most recently ran Elon Musk super PAC for the 7 swing states. And I asked him, are the Republican governors going to spend any money in Virginia in 2021? He said, no, we don't have any money budgeted, which I said, well, that means we're going to lose. Right? We're just out of the game, and I got to go tell the business community it's time to go, make your relationships more pronounced with the likely gubernatorial success for the Democratic Party. He said, yeah. I said, but also, if we don't win this year, we're going to be a third party in a 2-party system because we'll just be a 1-party state. He said, yes, this is a gentleman who grew up in Virginia, ran gubernatorial campaigns in Virginia. And I said, well, that's what I got to know. And at the same time, the Republican Party of Virginia couldn't decide the manner in which it was going to nominate its 3 candidates for statewide office, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. They had multiple rounds of balloting. It's an annual fight for the Republican Party of Virginia. They couldn't determine between convention and primary, which was saying to the rest of the Commonwealth, if you can't determine your own nomination methods, how can you ask us to let you run the Commonwealth itself, which is a very laudable and notable reality. And they furthered their dysfunction by taking those conversations global by streaming the meetings. So it became a running problem and a brand narrative for the Republican Party of Virginia. And they came up with a solution, ranked choice voting in a hybrid convention primary format. And everyone said, well, what's ranked choice voting? We'd never really heard of it. The Republican Party of Virginia, the State Central Committee, said, we used it last year to elect our state party chair, Rich Anderson. And this is how it works. And everyone said, okay. And 17 candidates signed up to get on the ballot and signed their delegates to participate in this hybrid format. 27,000, I think, delegates were signed up. They were told how to use ranked choice, but my job was to interview all these candidates, typically in a Zoom format, typically against each other. And a lot of these people I served with in the House of Delegates or knew their campaign managers. And what I noticed was, contrary to the previous testimony, there was a lot more civil discourse. A lot more issues were being discussed. They couldn't alienate other voters down ticket. And they would say, you know, if I can't be your first choice, please make me your second choice. And they were trying to take on the issues and subject that the other candidates were bringing up, because they wanted those voters to come and vote for them as the eventual winner, which is one of the benefits of ranked choice. Fast forward to the election day, when the party-run, paper ballot, hand-counted ballots, this is a party-run process, were counted. I was covering it for a radio show, and one of the aides, campaign consultants for the gentleman who finished second, a self-funded businessman, came up to me during the balloting and said, you know, I know you're with Glenn Youngkin and everything, but if it wasn't for this stupid ranked choice voting, we could have won this race. And I'm like, I'm not with Glenn Youngkin, but you know, what's your problem with ranked choice voting? Again, totally agnostic on the issue. I was just observing the behaviors internally in the Republican Party, of which I've been involved since 1992. I said, what's your problem with ranked choice voting? He said, we couldn't tear the bark off Glenn Youngkin. I said, riveting testimony, I know. That's quite all right. But I said, well, let me get this straight. You're upset because you couldn't attack a fellow Republican when we haven't won an election in 12 years and we're on the brink of being turned out to a third party? I think you're looking past what the opportunity was here all along. And as a direct result, ladies and gentlemen, the Republican Party, which some of you I know are not that concerned about politically, however, in a healthy two-party system, I think it's very valuable to have two parties that are functional and can compete to win. It benefits society at large. They were able to use this to get themselves righted in a situation, a time and point at which the Republican Governors Association came in the middle of the summer with $15 million, took over the ground game. You had the Afghanistan withdrawal fiasco and a debate opportunity for the Republicans, and they were in a position to win. But for ranked choice voting as a tool in their toolbox, they never would have been in a position to do that, because they would have attacked each other, destroyed their brand, and repeated the same cycle they've been doing for years and years. Since that time, the Republican Party of Virginia has used it to nominate congressional candidates, state Senate candidates, as well as House of Delegates candidates successfully. It's not a panacea. It's not used in every application. You shouldn't do it. I mean, that's been my example, just watching the Republican Party. They also took up a resolution to ban ranked choice voting. There's activists out there who don't like it. I get it. But one thing, in opposition to the testimony that was previous, there was no confusion. People carried out their ballots. 20-some thousand ballots were taken care of. There was no complaints. And anyway, they took up this resolution, and by a vote of 2-1, the Republican Party State Committee, Central Committee, voted down the resolution banning ranked choice voting, because they know it's useful when we need it. And it's just one of those tools in the toolbox that has helped the Virginia Republican Party become a competitive party in a two-party system. And the rest of my testimony is submitted to you. I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Okay, committee, are there any questions for Mr. Saxman? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for interrupting your testimony earlier.
I sat in many committee meetings and completely understand.
You're flipping through and you hit the wrong thing. But in your testimony here, I see on the back page that you write, if you don't, however, banning a very useful tool from the electoral toolbox, particularly when it is already prohibited under existing laws, could hurt Kansas Republicans in years to come. Is that what your testimony is about? Is like making sure that we preserve?
If you're going to preclude it by banning it, internal party use, which the gentleman just discussed is applicable, it can stymie those efforts by continuing, frankly, narratives that aren't accurate, in my estimation. From what I was able to experience in watching the Republicans since 2021 use this tool in their toolbox.
Okay, so
not necessarily, this is not a partisan thing. It's just a healthy two-party.
I was going right to it. It's like, I don't see how that's a bad thing, but all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions for Mr. Saxman? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Saxman, for being here today. I see in the proponent testimony that we have something in here from Ken Cuccinelli, and I was a little curious with the Virginia connection between the both of you. Had you spoken to him? What is his take on this? Why would he be in proponency?
I can't speak directly for the former senator, state senator and attorney general with whom I used to play basketball when we were in the House and the Senate. We consider him a friend. I don't think he's a supporter of ranked choice voting, I have not talked to him specifically. You know, the people, again, some people support it, some people don't. I just don't find utility in banning things that can be useful at a proper time. Again, not a panacea, not for every election, every single year, but when you need a tool in the toolbox, that's what the example the Republican Party of Virginia used internally in 2021 to its benefit, to its success. So I just think just rounding out the reality of what this thing actually did, you know, for the benefit of the Commonwealth of Virginia, in my estimation, in electing a very conservative statewide ticket, I think shows, you know, there's some utility to it.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, and thank you for that as well, that clarification. The next piece is, you know, Kansas law, I believe our Constitution doesn't even allow for ranked choice voting. But I guess my question is more in alignment. Have you seen it have deleterious effect, either for your party or anything?
I'm an active member of the party. I want to make sure that I'm in my role in life right now is nonpartisan. It's very comfortable.
Okay.
I sleep a lot better. But yeah, when you start enacting bans, it tends to pervade and be handed off to other states and localities. Like, oh, this is a bad thing. Look at the example here. We just had a situation in Alaska where there was a recall on the ballot, and the Alaska voters voted it down because they like it. Now, it was a close election, but an election nonetheless. And localities are moving towards it. We have several localities moving towards it in Virginia. You know, it's a healthy thing. I think it's a healthy conversation for the electorate. I think it's a healthy conversation for political parties and candidates and campaign consultants to look at the manner in which they're conducting themselves. And I think this, again, is a useful tool in the toolbox when you need it, is good to have on hand.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Saxman? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Saxman, so I'm taking it your take on it. I mean, Kansas has had this experience, and maybe this is sort of a Republican sort of concept here, but where you have, you know, like you have a Republican, a Democrat, you know, and a Libertarian on the ballot, where, you know, the Republican might get 45%, or Libertarian gets 6%, or get my math right, public math is a problem, but where you can narrowly lose an election, though arguably most of your Libertarian voters would have voted Republican as far as, you know, as far as like on a second choice. Or we've had situations here in Kansas where disaffected Republican runs as an independent, you know, even though most of his voters would have supported the Republican, certainly as a second choice. I mean, so, that's basically what you're saying. If we would, as far as on just the positive, even though this bill is not exactly going to establish it. The opposite of it. But is that kind of the concept that you're kind of going for? That it helps stop spoiler candidates?
Well, there's a spoiler effect, and I think we've seen that recently in elections, in the U.S. Senate elections in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan for Republicans, 2 runoff races in Georgia, and most recently in congressional races, one in particular in Virginia's 2nd congressional district in Virginia Beach, there was a intentional spoiler candidate recruited to run to the right of the Republican nominee, Jen Kiggins, Constitution conservative, on the real tax cutter, that kind of, they put in $500,000 for the intentional spoiler effect and run up those numbers. So there is that is a nefarious thing that's going on, and that was one of, I think, about a dozen attempts throughout the country to do that very thing, and it was relatively successful, so it'll come back in the midterms as well. And I think that's something that ranked choice voting can solve. However, that's not the nature of this bill. You're a plurality system. We're a plurality system in Virginia. We used it in the nomination process, in preferential primaries for presidential nominations. Could be a very useful tool. With as many candidates are going to be running in 2028, I think most states should look at this as a way to manage the masses that are going to be flooding the gates to get on the ballots.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Saxman? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony, and
Thank you, Mr.
for
Chair,
being
members of
here
the
today.
committee.
Our next conferee is Ms. Elaine Stephen. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Elaine Stephen. I'm from Wichita, and hoping I don't fall asleep on the way home. It's been a long weekend. First of all, Mr. Sneed mentioned, and he's from Alaska, I believe, and he is part of a consortium of overlapping legal entities that go around testifying against ranked choice voting. I'm here testifying as myself, but I am one of the co-leaders of Rank the Vote Kansas. All of our members are from Kansas. We actually screen people who try to join, and if they are from, well, we have a couple from Kansas City, Missouri, because for a while there was like overlap, but that's it. Like, we don't let anyone in Rank the Vote Kansas unless they are a Kansan. As far as dark money, I wish we had money. When we have a financial need, we pass the plate. I mean, we're not even incorporated yet. So we have grassroots support in Kansas, not for implementing ranked choice voting right now. That is not what we're looking at. What we want to do is just be able to talk about it and just be able to say, hey, if we can go out and talk to the community 10 years down the road, is this something that we could possibly, as a state, bring back to you, the legislature, because I agree that is how this needs to be passed. Bring it back to you guys, the legislature, and say, hey, is this a conversation we can have? So the other thing is, I am an independent. I am conservative, but I am an independent. And I don't know if I should admit this or not, I volunteered full-time on Greg Orman's campaign for governor in 2018. And I know very well and very painfully that that race was split. And so, as Vice Chair Wagner pointed out, vote splitting is something that we have happen here in Kansas. We also had, the 2018 Congressional District 4 race in which Ron M. Estes ran deliberately in the primary against Congressman Ron Estes. I mean, this is an election integrity issue, and ranked choice voting solves it. It should not be legal for somebody to be able to enter a race and run deliberately to pull votes from another candidate. And we have in Kansas the last 2 gubernatorial races where the percent of votes from smaller candidates outweighed the difference between the 2 larger party candidates. To clarify a couple of other things, ranked choice voting has been used over a century in both Australia and Ireland. It has not hurt the party system in either one of those countries. Australia still has a very strong and powerful conservative faction that has actually been in power for 68 out of the last 110 years. If you'd like to try ranked choice voting, and I apologize for just jumping around here, like I said, a long weekend. On page 5 of my written testimony, there's a QR code, and you can scan that and try ranked choice voting. It is an unscientific poll of which is the best state university in Kansas. And I want to reiterate for KU folks, it is an unscientific poll. Let's see. Oh, as far as also, one of the things they talked about, the proponents talked about, was exhausted ballots. Again, as a independent, I'm used to my vote like not counting, and really all they're talking about with an exhausted ballot is a candidate, as a voter who did not vote for one of the top 2 vote getters in that race. That's all it is. The other thing is, and I've put a screenshot in my written testimony, they are including undervotes in that total for exhausted ballots. Well, there's a lot of races where I skip because I don't like whoever's running. But that does not mean that that my ballot was thrown out. That's totally different. They mentioned Oakland and New York City, the 2 errors there. Neither one of those errors had anything to do with ranked choice voting. The Oakland error was because somebody forgot to uncheck a box in the computer system. The New York City error was because whoever had done the trial race forgot to empty out the entries before running the real election. Either one of those could have happened in a plurality election. The last thing is, real quick. First, so Kohlhaas versus Alaska, the State Supreme Court of Alaska found that ranked choice voting does meet one person, one vote. And that's because the vote transfers between rounds. If you'd like to see how ranked choice voting works, I've got a visual explanation in my written testimony. Santa Claus did run for election in Alaska. That is his real name. He lives in North Pole, Alaska, and he ran as a socialist candidate or something like that. I don't know exactly. But yes, that was a real candidate. That was not like some kind of Jack Sparrow thing. So, and then lastly, as far as one of the things we hear a lot in criticism of ranked choice voting is that it takes too long to tabulate. Ranked choice voting can be tabulated as soon as ballots are in hand. I know that there's consideration right now of eliminating the 3-day grace period. If that 3-day grace period is eliminated, that means that ranked choice voting tabulation could happen on election night. So there would be no delays. The reason that Alaska takes 2 to 3 weeks to tabulate is because there are no roads in the state, and therefore they fly all the ballots in a bush plane. And they have to wait for good weather. So to summarize, those of us in Kansas that are interested in ranked choice voting, at this point, we're just interested in having the conversation. And so I ask that you not ban ranked choice voting so that we can just keep having that conversation. Oh, and I'll stand for questions when you're ready.
Are there any questions for Ms. Stephen? Okay, so this is the challenge that I have, and I know you're an expert on this. You know a lot more about it than I do. You know a lot more about it than I do. How would you explain to a Kansas voter, like how, if we were to go to ranked choice voting for governor, how is the winner determined in that race?
Well, they look at the first choice votes, and if one candidate doesn't have at least 50% of the votes, then they look at whichever candidate has the least number of votes. They then say, okay, we're going to count those voters' second choices, and then they redistribute. And you can see it, I think it's page 6 in my testimony. But so it's just like if I go into a restaurant and I skip lunch to drive up here. So that's why I'm shaking. But if I go into a restaurant on the way out of here, and I'm like, I haven't been to Culver's, but may try that. So if Culver's doesn't have the chicken sandwich I want, then I know it goes to I know I want my second choice, which is a cheeseburger. And so it's just, we do it all the time when we go to restaurants, when we go really do anything.
Do you think that do you not think that it's simpler to just be able to tell a voter whoever gets the most votes wins?
That is simpler to be able to say, but does that mean that's the right thing to do just because it's simpler to say? I mean, personally, I think the election integrity issue of not allowing somebody to run to deliberately pull votes from somebody else is a bigger deal than having a simpler explanation.
So one more before I hand it off here. So and these are legitimate questions. The reason I'm hearing this bill is because I want to have this conversation. So we're having the conversation about ranked choice voting, which is what you said you wanted to do. Like on this ballot, this example ballot that we were given, why is it fair to only do 3 rounds if you've got like 20 candidates or 30 candidates? Because you immediately eliminate all but 3 in the first round. Why would you not, if you really want to be fair and you wanted to make sure that we narrowed in on the choice that had the most, I don't know, whatever, that thing that you said about how we select a winner, why wouldn't I do 20 or 30 rounds to make sure that like everybody, only one got eliminated in each round?
That's a practical issue, and us in Kansas being pragmatic. The voting system, if you had like that ballot for them, even with just 3, is ridiculous. When you limit the number of choices, it tends to make the ballots more reasonable. There are pictures of 3 different ballots in my written testimony, and there would have been more if I could afford the ink to have printed more pages. In Kansas, we would not need to buy all new election machines. That is one misconception that I think happened last year. 97, only 8 counties, only 8 or 9 counties in Kansas don't have election machines that would be compatible with ranked choice voting with a software update. Now, for the machines that we have, most of the machines that we have would be limited to 5 choices just for practical reasons. With our party system, and even as an independent, I don't think we need to get rid of the party system. That party system and the ballot access requirements to run as an independent mean that in our Kansas, like statewide elections, we usually have no more than 5 candidates. Even in 2018, we only had 5 candidates. And so, now would that, it does present a problem to have the more limited rankings when you have like a gazillion candidates. And that's why in the Alaskan system, which is not pure ranked choice voting, it is ranked choice voting combined with open primaries, the open primary part, which we are not proposing, the open primary part is why they have so many candidates, and then they wind up using plurality for their primary and ranked choice for the general once it's already narrowed down to 4 candidates.
All right, Representative Penn, did you have a question?
Well, I don't want to belabor the point or anything like that, but Madam, thank you for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the recognition. When it comes to ranked choice voting, is there, you know, it sounds like you can game the system when we talk about, you know, people coming in and maybe running another candidate to take votes away and enter into the rounds, and they're doing it in a fashion without the integrity, right? Prima facie, they're saying, hey, listen, I might want to, you know, get into a situation where, you know, I field a candidate to draw votes away, enter into the second choice, and end up bubbling up individuals that are not necessarily the choice that we would like to have in a head-to-head. Do you see any potential for that happening, or have you seen the examples of that happening across the board?
Of the various voting methods, and there are many voting methods, of the various voting methods, ranked choice voting is the least vulnerable to gaming. It is also the one that dissuades strategic voting and instead incentivizes people voting their conscience. Because when you're thinking about all the different rankings, it's too complex for anyone to possibly start to figure out, oh, well, if I do this, then so-and-so is going to do that. But with our current system, we can anticipate what people are going to do. Like in that 2018 gubernatorial election, people knew that, you know, there was going to be a spoiler effect. So they went to one of the 2 major candidates. Ranked choice voting is just, because you don't know how everybody else is going to rank, it's almost impossible to manipulate.
So you touched on something I want to follow up on. You said like this incentivizes people to vote their conscience. Well, you know, I really, really, really like Captain Jack Sparrow. Now that I've seen the picture, I really, really, really like him. If you're asking me to vote my conscience, I'm going to vote 3 times, and all 3, you know, 1, 2, and 3. He's my first, second, and third choice. But I know that if he gets eliminated in the first round, then my ballot just gets thrown away. So you're driving me to vote for somebody I don't really want is my second choice, because otherwise I don't get it. You know, I'm out of the election after the first round. So could you explain to me, like, what is it that you mean when you say that it incentivizes voting your conscience?
So in 2018, we had a libertarian, 1 independent who got a very small percentage of the votes, 1 independent who got 6.5%, a Democrat and a Republican. So we can pretty much guess that the libertarians and the voters for the smaller independent would have gone to the Republican. I know from being on that campaign that I was not the only conservative on that campaign. So had we had second choices, so having ranked choice voting would have allowed people to vote for who they wanted as first choice without feeling like they were wasting their vote on an independent, and then having the vote for their second choice actually count instead of the vote being split like it was.
Representative Simmons.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying this. This is so interesting. And I just keep thinking about how this is so much like many Democrats in the state of Kansas who are registered Republicans so they can vote in the primary, not for someone they prefer against their conscience, but so that their voice is actually heard in the democratic process. And then, of course, their vote is essentially discarded in the general election. I think this is so interesting. And of course, I'm sure many of us keep thinking of our former state senator Dennis Pyle, who ran a write-in campaign with the intention of splitting the vote in favor of Governor Kelly. I really appreciate this conversation, and it's very, oh, but I did. I will say it, I will say it. This is a really fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate your passion and your expertise, and thanks for skipping lunch. That's my favorite meal, too.
Well, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Take a look at our website, ranktheVoteKansas.org. The main thing is we just want to be able to continue this type of conversation. This is clearly not something we can implement without the legislature. So, why ban it preemptively? It is an interesting conversation, and it really could, I think, help Kansans.
Great. Are there any other questions for Ms. Stevens? Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate having you here today. Our next conferee is Mr. Andrew Booz on WebEx. Sir, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome to the committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm coming to you from Olathe, Kansas. I'm very sorry I could not be there today. And I'm a member of the Rank to Vote Kansas, but I am presenting on my own behalf. I believe that this piece of legislation should be opposed, not only because it's unnecessary, but also because ranked choice voting is ultimately understandable and it empowers people to express their preferences. I'm not going to belabor the point as to why it's unnecessary. I do want to say, though, that there are sections in the statutes that also mention that you have to select your particular candidate preference on your ballot via a cross or a check mark. And so that would prevent you from having a ranked ballot in these sorts of elections. I also believe that ranked choice voting is understandable. Previous speakers have said that it really isn't. However, in the Utah Municipal Alternate Voting Methods Pilot Project, yeah, that's a mouthful, there was a overview of 2 studies done by Utah Valley University that's linked in my written testimony that shows that 81% of people who use ranked choice voting at the local level found that it was either very or somewhat easy to use. And additionally, a majority of people enjoyed and wanted to keep using that method of voting. And so, when you have the opportunity to use it and you use it for a couple elections, you do find that it's easy to use. Additionally, the fact that ranked choice voting eliminates that spoiler effect really is important for enfranchising Kansas. Previous speakers have mentioned that your ballots are thrown out, but I genuinely do not think it's any worse than our current plurality winner system. For example, the 2018 Kansas Republican primary for governor had 7 candidates, of which 4 of them got over tens of thousands of votes. And yet the candidate who won that primary only won by 343 votes. I'm sure that some of the voters for the 3rd and 4th place candidates in that primary had opinions on the decision between the top 2, and yet their ballots were thrown out because they were not able to express that preference in their ballots. That may not have changed the results, but it certainly would have built a more durable majority for whoever had won that primary going into the general election. And that could just as easily happen in a Democratic primary as well. So overall, I absolutely think that we should be thinking about this carefully and doing this through the legislature. But after considering everything, I believe that you'll find that allowing ranked choice voting is better than banning. I would be more than happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Booz? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony. And the final conferee that I have listed to speak is Mr. Richard Pund on WebEx. Sir, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Richard Pund. I'm a resident of Overland Park. I oppose Senate Bill 6. I actually took off work this afternoon early to be here today. I believe that I would like to see the opposite approach as well, and I think the state should allow cities to use ranked choice voting if they'd like to. I know there are a lot of questions about how ranked choice voting works, and so I think a good way to understand it is that it essentially combines our local primaries and local general elections into one round of polls. So right now, our local primaries only happen if there's, over a minimum number of candidates that are on the ballot. And the primary essentially narrows down the field to 2 or 3 candidates, depending on what the election is, or 3 times the number of seats available. So one reason that cities might want to use ranked choice in the future would be to make that combination, save some voters some time, save themselves some money from holding that primary, make things a little faster and more efficient. However, I know that this bill is about banning ranked choice, so I'll focus most of my testimony on that. I did hear that some of the arguments for this bill, one was talking about exhausted ballots, and I'll use local elections again as an example of how exhausted ballots actually work. So in my written testimony, I have a couple of election results from Overland Park's mayor election in 2021. So in a ranking system, once the candidates that the person has voted for have been eliminated, their ballot is exhausted. An equivalent to that today would be as if a person voted for a candidate that lost in the local primary, and then they come back for the general election and decide to leave that election blank. So in my example, if someone voted for the candidate who finished 4th, and then they come back for the general and they undervote, that's the same thing as just ranking that candidate first and no one else in, second and third choice rankings. So it's really something we're already doing today and something that is already happening. So I don't see really why that would be a reason to ban ranked choice voting. We're just kind of following the precedent that's already happening with plurality. The other point I heard about was the amount of time it takes to process the election results. And again, similar to plurality, where we get unofficial results on election night and we have to wait for the canvass for the official results, we could still get unofficial results on election night from ranked ballots. And then when the canvass happens, all the ballots are there. We can do the ranking process pretty much instantaneously and get those results then. So again, I don't see much difference between what we do today with plurality and what we do with ranked choice if a city chooses to adopt it. I'd also like to point out that the legislature has done a special committee on ranked choice voting back in 2017, and it's my understanding that the findings of that committee kind of go against maybe the opinions of some of the proponents today. But back during that committee, they spent a day learning about it, and their opinion back then was that the law allowed home rule governments to adopt ranked choice, and they were okay with that. They decided to take no action at that time. Now I know things have changed. There's, different lawmakers today, so maybe that's revisited. But at least back then, it was okay for home rule cities to do that. So I just wanted to point that out, that this had happened. I believe that summarizes what my written testimony was. So I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time, and thank you all for your time.
Are there any questions for Mr. Poon? That last thing you said, I want to make sure I heard you right. Are you saying that at one point here in Kansas, with the same statutes we have now, the opinion was that home rule did allow municipalities to do ranked choice voting? Is that what you said?
Yes, I can find that. It's on the legislature's website, but it's the 2017 Special Committee on Elections. And I actually attended it, and yeah, that was their conclusion.
Okay, so you would disagree with those conferees that say this is unnecessary because it's already illegal?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but That's what I remember from that committee hearing.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Poon? Mr. Vice Chairman.
I did want to ask you a question, Mr. Pond, about the, as far as, I mean, cities would maybe be the people who would be trying to use this. I mean, I can see the fact, and I think you make a legitimate point, that it's kind of an instant runoff process. I mean, I've seen where we've had, 8 people on the city council ballot, so you have a primary, and then it reduces it down to 4 or something. That if you had a ranked choice and you just have all 8 up and do it like that. I mean, are you aware of cities like maybe arguing it's going to be an efficiency measure, it's going to, reduce the cost of elections, you just have a general election and you don't have to have a primary and a general when you have a lot of candidates? I mean, I'm just curious if you ever heard that type of thought process.
I haven't heard elected officials making that argument. That's really just mine. My understanding is, at least in Overland Park, that primary for mayor cost somewhere over $100,000. We have 200,000 people in the city, so it would be somewhere in that ballpark. And all that did was narrow down the field from 4 candidates to 2.
Thank you.
But yeah, just my argument there.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Poon? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to thank you very much for your testimony, sir. I don't have anyone else listed as an opponent on this bill to speak. Is there anybody wishing to speak in opposition to this bill? Okay, seeing none, committee, I'll direct your attention to the list of written testimony on this bill in opposition. Please take a look at that, and I'm going to close the opponent testimony. I'm going to close the hearing on this bill. Committee, this concludes our work for today. I just want to give everybody a kind of heads up on what's coming up next week. So on Tuesday, we are not meeting. On Thursday right now, I've got listed Senate Bill 177 as a informational hearing because it has not been referred to our committee. I was hoping that it was going to be heard this week, but it looks like it's not going to be heard until next week. And so they have passed out and referred to us Senate Bill 105, which is their mirror to our 2057, which is about selecting U.S. senators. And I'm going to make a change to the schedule. To the agenda for next week. And Thursday, we will have a hearing on Senate Bill 105 rather than 177 because it's not going to be referred to us in time. And I don't want to have an informational hearing and then have to have another hearing. So with that, is there anything for the good of the order? Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned.